I suppose this is something that has happened to my life over the last, since 2010, my life changed. Both my parents got ill at the same time. My father was rapid, it was cancer, very late diagnosis, and I took him, he wanted to come home to die, and of course I didn't know. It was one of the nurses in the hospital that told me to bring him home, he needs to go home to die. So we had the hospice out to help us, and it was that awful December 2010, so the army used to bring them. And it was so bad that we were given, the morphine was left with us to put in the pump. So that was my first, I suppose, connection, or to see the power of something like that and what it could do. But we had Dad for 12 nights, but he roared and screamed, why couldn't he die? And I just, you're there and you don't want him to die because it's all so sudden, but you're also thinking, my God, this is cruel. I was brought up in rural Ireland on a small holding in the west of Ireland. We had ponies, and I grew up, I was privileged to have my grandfather there every day, and we rarely had a vet. But no animal ever suffered, and that was one thing I learned. While they could have been, whether it was the cat, the dog, or whatever, I never saw an animal suffer, and any of the neighbours either. So I suppose when you start to experience deaths with, first of all, it's always your aunts and that was cancer, was rapid, with horrendous death, like pancreatic from my mom's side. And then we knew there was something wrong with Mom, but we got a diagnosis for a mixed dementia, vascular and frontal-temporal. And Dad had passed, that she came to live with me, and this endless journey. She didn't have her affairs in order, Dad didn't really either, properly. And when I went to do a power of attorney, her GP said she didn't have the capacity. He was afraid, even though the solicitors was quite happy to do it. So that brought on, which thankfully is gone now, the ward of court system. I had to make Mum a ward of court. And her rights were completely violated. And I don't know, you don't, when you're living through it, you don't actually, it's kind of day to day and everything is happening. But her last year she was non-verbal. The GP didn't come to the house to visit, but I don't know how, because I didn't have any experience, but I remembered morphine was good for Dad and pain. So I asked to have morphine patches, and the GP gave them to us, and then I upped them. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it's probably after, like you're talking about grief and you live after, and I started to do, Mum passed in 2014, and then I had gone back to do a course, and I just wanted to highlight living with dementia in rural Ireland and what it meant, and how communities just, especially for later towards the end, because Mum was too late when she was diagnosed, and the way she was treated and cut off, and when I became a carer. So I started to do a conference, and Tom came to the second one in 2017. So I've been listening to Tom, but I was just thinking when you were saying that, it's taken a while for things to sink in. I think sometimes maybe it's our age as well. When you're younger, you think you're just, there's no stopping. You don't have to think about anything. And then I start to see, and then I got cancer myself in 2019, and that kind of stops you in your tracks, and you think, oh God, yeah, maybe I'm not going to be here forever. And of course, when I met up with Helen, I mean, that's really, every day you think of, yeah, we are entitled to make our own decisions. I don't want anyone like Mum had to be put into the ward court system. They then dictated how her money could be spent. So they decided they'd save it in case she had to go into a nursing home, which I said she would never be going into a nursing home. But rather than like a paid for physio, they didn't want her. It was just like leave her at home to die. And I suppose, yeah, the government is a complete disaster, and it has been forever and ever, really. There's very few politicians that I have admiration for and that will go out and fight once they get their position. It's just, and we have to keep fighting and fighting. It's the only way, and it's talking about it, and eventually, hopefully, I think it has to affect each of them personally before they even get a hint of how we feel and what living in the real world means. Dementia has affected quite a number of families and politicians, so some of them have come out to support. They still, like Helen said, we have a statutory right to go into a nursing home, not for care in our own home. I am contacting members of the government every single day on other issues like homelessness, planning. I come from a village, I'm sure you've all heard of it, Outrard, and it's horrendous what goes on in that village. But that's not what you see out in public and has been on national TV, is not how we all feel. Yes, we're all tarred with the same brush in the village. Yes, there are a number. But how their voices can be heard and the others, the rest of us can't, just amazes me, and they are just a tiny minority, and yet they're ruling the roost, as my mom would say. So I just think, how do you change that? How do you change that whole, and then there's politicians that's on every day going on about how they can, and I'm able to call them out on something that they talk about, and prove to them. And they all step back like that, they pass it on, it's another department. I wrote to Micheál Martin, it took him like 2 months to answer from his department, but it was sent on to the housing department minister. It's just, they just tie themselves up in knots. And really, they don't do anything. I think it's the civil servants. They're the ones that make the decisions. And to be honest, and probably I was privileged with meeting Jules in Dublin, and then the event we did in the Lexicon last year. And I just thought, and I talk about it, Helen unfortunately couldn't go that day, but that has been one of the most privileged afternoons I've ever spent. And I talk about it all the time, and talk with Tom, and we had the best of fun.
To give a little bit of context there, Jewel Breeze is Canadian, and I met her in 2022 at the World Federation Right to Die conference. Heard her story. Her husband was living with Alzheimer's. They had a 4-year journey. Because they had legislation in Canada, right from the start he'd said, at a point when I am ready, I want to avail of assisted dying, of MAID as they call it in Canada, medical assistance in dying. And he said, let nobody change my mind, because my mind is going to change, but I'm telling you now, and he never wavered, that was what he wanted. I heard her speak. She came over in Dublin in 2024, so all of her talks are up on YouTube, on our End of Life Island YouTube channel. She spoke on the stage with her doctor, who had that journey with her and her husband. But over the course of knowing her, she wrote a 1-act play. And I invited her to the conference. Tom's laughing because it really was quite bittersweet and very funny at the same time. It was hilarious in some instances. But it was a privilege to be able to have somebody who had been through that whole process of thinking about an assisted death with a loved one, going through all of the necessary paperwork and safeguarding, both being involved in education. She had recorded their conversations, and all of the material she's now given to us at End of Life Ireland. But she produced this play, and I asked Tom and Carmel to be the readers in this play, and Jewel was there as well. But it was the first time people in Ireland had been in the same room with somebody who could talk very openly about what had happened and what it was like for her, and how a kinder death was possible. But I'll pass that back to you, but you needed the Canadian context in it.
And what fascinated me was that they picked a date, I don't remember the date, and it was a year in advance, and I just thought, how could you live? Like, did you wake up every morning and say, oh, we're a day closer? And she goes, no, they didn't mention it. And like you've said already, they just got on with their lives. And at the end, he actually brought the date forward. This fascinated. I mean, it was just, I was like, wow. And he cleared the drive because he was afraid they were going to be snowed in and the doctor wouldn't get. I mean, it was just, the whole story was magical. But the afternoon was just, and it was even, like, listen, I suppose, it was very intimate. It was full, and another lady that came from Cork for the day, this has lived with my every minute. Her husband is now in a nursing home. He has a dementia diagnosis, but they had two other friends, couples, and one of each couple had been given a dementia diagnosis, and both had committed suicide. I mean, she disclosed this in the lexicon, the stories. You just knew you were somewhere very privileged, but yet none of us could do anything, we all knew. So I suppose I use this as my bumper sticker at home. I talk about it all the time, and I just say, it's our choice, everybody's choice. I will not die. I mean, I've had this conversation with one of my sisters. We would help one another. We would, there are ways to do things, but it's terrible if we have to do that. I don't have children, I don't have family. I certainly wouldn't like my family to be responsible for me. So I have to make that decision for myself, and I will.